Well, thanks for joining us here on News Moms Unscripted. I'm Beth Hunt, and today we're talking about summer brain drain in kids. This is really the idea that kids' knowledge slips during the summer, and they not only aren't learning anymore, but they lose some of what they learned during the previous school year. I'm joined by Dr. Shoutell Richardson with the Little Rock School District. She is the principal in the district. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, this is going to be an interesting conversation. I told you this is something I'm dealing with right now, so I know that other moms and caregivers must be as well. But before we get started, if you would give us a little background about yourself in education and just personally a little bit about yourself being a principal here in the district.
Okay. Well, a little bit about myself. As you said, I'm Dr. Shoutell Richardson. I'm the proud principal of Bale Elementary, home of the Bobcats. Go Bobcats. I've been with the district now. I'm embarking on my 30th year in education. I've worked in several different capacities as a principal, an executive director of education. I am a teacher, of course, but most importantly, a mom. And so I think that is my first job as a teacher. And so 3 children of my own, my oldest being 36, my youngest being 30. So I think I've been in the mom game longer than I've been in the education game, but just excited. And this is something that, we all struggle with as parents, but also as teachers, because as we send kids out for the summer, we're often trying to encourage parents of things that they can do so that we can combat the summer brain drain, or as we sometimes call it, the summer slide in education, because we know kids often regress during those couple of months that they're off during the summer because they're not actively engaging their brain in things that stimulate them to learn.
Well, I think you're the perfect person to talk today, not only because you have an education background, teacher, principal, but you're also a mom, so you know all sides of this. Let's just start by talking about how real of an issue this is. Is this a real problem for kids when they go back to school in the fall?
This is a real problem. I was just talking to a colleague of mine just a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the brain drain or the summer slide that we sometimes refer to it as. And we were talking about some of the research, and the research is real. It's been out for years. And what the research tells us is that children on average lose about 2 months of their academic gains when they're out over the summer. And more specifically, research tells us that children lose about 2.6 months for math, 2 months for literacy, but on average, they just average it out to be about 2 months. But when we look at it when they return to school, what we see is the first 6 weeks of school, we're using that to try to regain what we've lost during those 6 months. And it takes us about 6 weeks of the beginning of the year of school just to regain what we've lost during the summer slide. So the research is real. The reality is real that children really are losing a lot of what they have gained over the school year during the summer. So on average, about 2 months. So you think we go to school for 9 months. When they go home for that summer break, they're losing 2 months of that academic gain.
And when you add that up over their whole, career, I guess, in education from K through 12, that you're talking about months, but in the
That
long
equates
term,
to
it's
years. That equates to years. And,
Yeah.
That's just to say, if you have a student who's been engaged all year and they haven't missed school, and they've been on time, they've not been tardy, and they've been engaged those 9.25 months. If they have been engaged that whole time, they're a solid student. But just think, if they've been absent, or they've been sick, or they've had COVID or anything else, or they've had some extenuating circumstances, some death, then you add that 2 month summer slide to that. That's a lot for a child. So the summer can be really, really detrimental to a lot of our kids. So that's why we have to make sure that we really go into the summer thinking, what can I do to overcome that summer learning loss?
Yeah. And I would imagine we'll talk about some of those things that we can do coming up in just a moment, but I would imagine coming off of the pandemic and the learning loss that we've seen there, that it's even more important to, engage kids during the summer.
That you are absolutely right, Beth. Coming off of the pandemic and the fact that we were not engaging with kids personally, and many of them were engaged with technology. We had video games teaching our children. We had, we were virtual in a lot of places. Around the country, well, in all places around the country during COVID, and some schools were out longer than others. And we had parents who were really not equipped to educate our kids. That summer loss was really, really hard for many of our students.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into some things that parents can do during the summer. I know the number one thing that I hear from teachers is to read with your kids, and that it's important not only to have them read, but you also have a conversation with them about what they are reading. If you can, just talk about the importance of all of that.
Well, it's very, very important. And, it doesn't take as much time as people think. On average, if you could spend about 2 to 3 hours a week with your child, just re-engaging them in some things that would pique their curiosity, which would engage them in things like, for instance, practice writing. So with our young kids, when I say practice writing, practice writing a sentence, give them a sentence to write, um, our kindergarten, first graders, give them something to write. Have them go to the grocery store with you. Ask them to help you write the grocery list. Give them the sales papers that come out in the mail on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, whatever they come out in your neighborhood, and say, hey, mom's going to go to the grocery store. We're going to go grocery shopping. I need apples. I need oranges. I need cereal. And have them to go through the sale paper and actually copy down what it is you're going to be shopping for. That's one way to encourage writing. Or for the younger kids, they could cut out the pictures and paste them on a piece of paper. That would be a way to encourage writing. For your older kids, have them to journal. Have them to write about what they did during the day or what they would like to do. So just 2 to 3 hours a week, having them to write for a purpose. Also encouraging students to just be creative and thoughtful during the day. What is something that you can do to help your community? What is something that if we could take a vacation, where would you want to go? And have them go through, everything is technology based now. Search the web. Where would you want to go? How far would it take us, or how long would it take us? Google how far we would have to go. What cities would we pass through? So using things that they're engaged in and that they're interested in to help them stay creative and also thoughtful. Write a letter to someone, or send an email to your granny. Get them away from the phone. Don't text her, because when they text, they're using shortcuts in their language. They're using shortcuts in their spelling. So you want to get them back to writing. We don't really do old-fashioned letters, but I encourage my Gigi baby to write a letter. So I write a sample for him and I say, hey, write your mom a letter when he's with me. Here's a sample. Write your mom a letter, and we're going to go to the post office and mail it. So you want to encourage them to be creative and be thoughtful in the things that they do. Write letters to a stranger. Let's take it to the nursing home. Other things that we want to do is we want to, of course, spend time reading, taking kids to the library, making sure that they have library cards. We would always take a laundry basket, and as many books as we could put in the laundry basket, that's how many books we would check out. So I had 3 kids, so our laundry basket would be pretty heavy by the time we left. But it's just little simple things like encouraging them to read. I read, you read, we read. So I would read a book, they would find a book to read to me, and then we would read a book together as a family. So sometimes that book would be a chapter book, and it might take us the whole summer to read it. But we always had that thought process. You read me a book, I'm going to read you a book, and then we're going to read the book together as a family. So summertime reading is really, really good. We would go to the library, and before we checked out books, we would just sit around the library and read. My family, one of our favorite field trips every week was Barnes and Nobles. And back then, we always had Books A Million, but we don't. So we would go to Barnes and Nobles, and everybody would find them a place in the bookstore, and they would just kind of lay down and lounge, and we would read magazines, and it was cheaper because we didn't have to buy them. We'd read magazines, they'd read all the books they like, but reading, writing, creating thoughtful experiences, and then also field trips. Now, sometimes it gets too hot, and if depending on the amount of kids you got, it could be very expensive. But embarking on field trips, whether they're virtual field trips, you can, log on to the internet, go to YouTube. We would go to London, we'd go to Paris, we'd go to Africa to see the animals. We would just take virtual field trips, and then we'd also take real field trips. So there are 4 things that you can do with your kids, 2 to 3 hours a week: field trips, writing, reading, and then doing something thoughtful, whether it's just sending a letter to someone in your family, going to visit a nursing home, going out to a park, or just doing something just thoughtful in the neighborhood, whether it's just picking up trash or just like I said, writing a letter to someone you love. But all of those things encourage creativity, it creates thoughtfulness, and it really helps with their social emotional learning.
And it seems like a lot of these, real life experiences, like a field trip or something as simple as going to the grocery store. I mean, those things are fun to them. And in many situations, they learn more from that than maybe they would sitting in a classroom.
And that is true. Those are some of the things that we also do during the school year. We try to make learning interesting to children, and we try to connect real life experiences, because those are the things that they connect to. Children are often, we can open up a book, but until they see the they see the connection to that book to their self, then it makes no sense to them. So we're always trying to make a book to book connection. We're trying to make a book to self connection and a book to real life connection. And when they can make a connection to what it is that you're expecting them to learn, then it makes sense. One more thing about the grocery store. I would have my kids, I'd say, hey, I need groceries, I need milk, bread, cereal, whatever. But one thing that would make it real to them is I'd say, okay, you can pick one thing that you want. And so you would see them scouring that sale paper, and they would be looking for, chips and candy or whatever it is. And very rarely is that in the sale paper, but, their favorite cereal would always be in the sale paper. But I said, okay, that one thing you can find, and if you write it on the grocery list, we would get it. And so that made it interesting. It made it real to them, because they knew we were going grocery shopping, and they would get to pick one thing. And they loved it when we'd go to Walmart, because Walmart was heaven for them. So looking for things and making things interesting and giving them an opportunity to participate in what it is you're doing, whether it's grocery shopping, whether it's, going to Home Depot, we would use those activities to learn about math and science and measurement. And I'd say, hey, let's grab the measuring. Mom needs a piece of wood this big, and we'd measure, and they'd go in, and I'd say, okay, measure this wood, even though I knew it was too large for what I needed, my project. But just having them go through the store and measure things, just, like I said, 2 to 3 hours of time with your kid will help to gather back those 2 to 3 months that they're losing in math and losing in reading, because what you're doing is you're giving them real life experiences. So when they return to school in the fall, they have things, and teacher said, okay, write about what you did this summer. Now they have something to write about. They have something that's real that they can write about, that they can add a voice to, they can add tone and style, which is what our kids really struggle with when it comes to writing. We say, write about a field trip, and they go, I ain't going on a field trip. But this gives them something that's real that they can connect to, and they can talk about going to Home Depot and measuring wood and measuring lumber, which is vocabulary. And so these are things that we are rich now in that they were not rich in before.
It's amazing what kids, the memories that they latch on to. Also, a funny story, similarly to what you were speaking about, one of my son's teachers asked him to write about what, his favorite vacation or whatever. And that year we had gone to the beach, and some things that I really thought were great. And all he wanted to write about was going to the state fair. And he was very descriptive about the corn dog he ate and all the rides. And I thought, wow, like that was his favorite thing.
That was his favorite thing. And so part of that, one of the things I did not talk about was, you know, uh the conversations we have with kids. And one thing that with older kids, and they don't have to be real old, but first, second grade, when you're writing, journaling, and this is one thing that I encourage all parents to do, is just get a dollar notebook and have your kids to write each day about something that they've done, they've enjoyed, they didn't enjoy. But what you'll find is it creates a connection because they can write. And then you always ask kids permission. You said, hey, do you mind if I respond to your writing? And my daughter and I, we started this when she was about 5 years old, and she's 30 now, and she and I still journal together. And so she'd say, dear mom, today I played with a turtle with uh Mary Beth. I think that was her first. No, it was not Mary Beth, Laura Beth. And she said, in the turtle was this. And so I would respond with, dear, I called her Ladybug. Dear Ladybug, it sounds like you guys had a wonderful time playing with the turtle. Did you discover what type of turtle it was? And so I would use that opportunity to enrich her vocabulary, to ask her questions, to make her think, but then also just to dialogue and keep that open conversation going. And then the next day, she would write. And so I would find her going back in the journal days later, looking for words that I had written that she didn't know how to spell, but she would go and find them in the journal. And then she would then use them in her writing. And so we did that all the way through elementary, all the way through middle school. And that was our open communication. And so, of course, the journal got to be, a little different. The terminology and the conversations got to be a little different. But that was our way of always having a gateway to communicate with each other. And so now, even in, college and even through adulthood, she'll write me, little notes, and she'll leave them on my desk, or she'll send me a text and it starts off, dear mom. And I'll respond, dear Ladybug. And so it's a rich way to ensure your kids are writing. They're writing for a variety of reasons, because sometimes it would be about school, sometimes it would be about the turtles, sometimes it would be about swimming or her wanting a new dress for prom. But whatever it was always a way to communicate, but it was always a way to encourage writing. So guess what her favorite subject is now?
Writing.
Writing.
Right.
Right.
And I'm sitting here thinking not only a great way to encourage writing, but, as they get older too, if they continue it, a great way, for their mental health, just to get their
That's
feelings out.
That was the ultimate goal, so that we would always have a communication, and she would always have someone that she could talk to. And if she couldn't verbalize it, you could always put it on paper.
Yeah.
And so we started that when she was like 5 years old. And so I did it with my boys. And of course, it didn't last long. We probably did it till they were about 12, but that was a long time for boys, actually sit down and journal. And so, they became more verbal after they were about 12, but for my daughter, it's lasted until, now she's
Yeah.
30.
I bet you have kept those journals and cherished them too.
Actually, she's kept them.
Oh, okay.
She kept them, and what's amazing is she took them to college with her, and she says, Mom, you just don't know how many times I've gone back and read through some of those journals and relied on a lot of the advice that, and things that we talked about, and helped me through some really tough days.
Yeah.
So people, we take for granted that our children don't listen to us, but they don't listen when we're telling them at the moment. But I think that as life goes on and they experience life, but it started during the summer drains, because as a teacher, I'm working, but I started it during the summer, and then one summer, and we just kept going through the school year, and we found that it was something that was really helpful for both of us, and it helped both of us and we just continued it. But writing is something that I tell teachers, if kids can write, that means that they can synthesize everything else that they've learned, the reading, the phonics, the content information, because writing is where everything comes together. So writing is probably one of the highest skills. So that's the application of everything that they learn. So if you can write with them and you can encourage them to write as a parent, it helps you to know where your children are thinking, but it also helps you to see if they are able to synthesize everything else that they've learned. So
Right.
writing is really a difficult skill, but I encourage parents to do it with them. And it helps you with your writing too, because you have to make sure you're a good model. But encouraging them to be thoughtful and creative, go outside, play, build things. Uh, I go to Home Depot and Lowe and just have them cut me different little pieces of wood. And then I just put it out there for my little grandbabies now and just see what they can make with it. And encouraging them to read, and go in different places. We go to Murray Park, we go to different parks, just different scenery. So when they're reading, they can hear different sounds, and it just puts them, reading is, I always tell them, reading can take you so many different places because your imagination is what you take to reading. And so, sometimes we'll go to the park and we'll pretend that we're on a beach, we'll pretend that we're pirates. And so as they're reading, you want to give them just so many different venues and opportunities to be creative. And next thing you know, they're up with sticks and they're Jimmy John, and they're just so, you have to give them outlets to play. And it only takes a couple of hours a week.
Right. And I love that a lot of these things that you have spoken about are actually free. It's not something that's going to cost a whole lot of money.
No, no. But if you're interested in spending money, you can always grab a copy of kids the kids directory, and look at it. It has all kind of activities. If you don't have the time and you want to put your kids in dance or put them in summer programs, you can always look up the kids directory. This helps to lessen the summer brain drain, but of course it's costly. But the things that I like to invest in are things that are of value that kids will take back with them, and things that they can do when you're unavailable, and it's free.
Yeah. Well, something I've struggled with this summer is having to work while my kids are at home. And I'm like, oh, I'm not there to do some of this for a better part of the day. So I have enrolled them in some summer programs and then leaned on the grandparents for a little bit of help as well. Do you
Yeah.
have any advice for busy parents during the summer in balancing it all and maybe communicating your wants to that caregiver who's taking care of your child?
Well, being an educator, one of the things I did was I always had a to-do list. I always had, a list on the refrigerator. And one of the things that I did was I had on there, read, 20 minutes a day, do this, outside, so I had those things identified. So even if they were with, Gigi, or they were with their aunt, or they were with dad, because, of course he didn't always execute the plan. So, I had specific times. Okay, everybody stop and read for 30 minutes. And so I had that big basket of library books that we had gone and gotten from the public library. And so just having some specific things that you have identified in writing, because if it's committed to writing, people are more likely to do it. And so I put those things on the refrigerator. So even if they spent 30 minutes, like you said, we're talking 2 to 3 hours a week. If they spent 30 minutes a day just reading, and and you went by Walmart or somewhere and just got some little theme notebooks for 80 cents and spent, 15 minutes writing. If they did those things and they just spent 30 minutes each day, then that would be much better than just, hey, playing video games, just lounging, watching mindless TV. So if you write some of those things down and give that list and say, hey, I know they're going to play and they're going to do this, but I want to commit to at least 30 minutes a day where they're reading, or you read to them, that they're writing, or just doing something academic, then that would be better than nothing.
Yeah. Well, one last question before we round this out. You mentioned video games, so I'd love to talk a little bit about electronics. With parents busy at work, a lot of people use those electronics as a babysitter.
Mhm.
How important as an educator do you think it is to limit that screen time? And on the flip side, do you see any good in it at all? Because a lot of people have these educational apps that their kids use. So yeah, just give me your thoughts on that.
Well, there of course there is great benefits in the educational apps. Of course we use them in school, because the reality is, that's where our children. I mean, we're not dealing. Like, let's say started teaching 30 years ago. We had a old white computer sitting, that went really slow. But these kids are, Generation Alpha, millennial, and this is how their brain is wired. I mean, their brain is wired to move like this, and, and we talk like this. And so there's benefits to that. I, encourage parents, teachers alike to limit it because we can't keep up with the speed of an app. But when they're on the apps, I encourage you to make sure it's an academic app. It's something that's geared toward, in helping your child to read or helping them to problem solve, not just, letting them get on apps that's going to be game based all the time. There are lots of educational apps out there. One that we use is education.com. For if you have younger kids, there's Star Falls and ABC. But there's some things that really, really are good that have what we call standards-based information or learning on there where the kids it's grade level specific, and the parents can actually go in and select activities for their kids to work on. Those are the ones that I encourage. Of course, they need to have some downtime where they select what they want, because choice is very, very important for our children. They need to have some autonomy, but just having a free for all the time, I think that that's not good for them, because what happens is they bring that choice into the classroom, and when you give them something to do, they don't know how to distinguish, or they don't know how to accept that, okay, this is not a choice time. This is a teacher designated time, and I have to put aside my choice to do what it is that the teacher has has required or has set aside for me to do. And for a lot of our children, especially our young kids, when they come to school, they've been given choice at all times, and they don't know how to separate and say, okay, this is not choice time. And so that creates a lot of, a lot of
Discipline issues. Yeah.
yeah, because they're like, because they're so used to having their choice and their,
Right.
their own autonomy. So, giving them some things where you as a parent have said, I need you to do this for 15 minutes. And then after you're done with that, we will discuss what your next option will be. I think having parents use words like options, and, you have the choice between this, or this is, you don't have an option this time. This is non-negotiable. I think that is would be really helpful with technology, because kids don't get that often. And when they come to school, they think that school is is a choice.
Yeah.
And they think everything in school is a choice, and they don't really understand non-negotiables and things that they have to do that's not a choice.
Right. Well, listen, I so appreciate your time today and all of your insight and knowledge. I think you've given parents some really good tips, and here's to no summer brain drain and a good school year ahead.
Yeah, so we don't want that summer slide. We want kids active, but we want them to have fun and be resourceful and be creative, because that's the one thing, if I could say that we don't see children utilizing as much of now, and that's problem solving, creativity, and thoughtfulness. They need to have opportunities where they can create things and they can problem solve. Just giving things and say, hey, what can you make with that? Like we were as kids. When we were, I always laugh. I said, we started off with 4 bikes at Christmas because everybody got a bike. But by January, there was only 1 working bike, but we took all 4 and we made 1 work. But that was problem solving. And our kids now, they don't have a sense of problem solving, because if something breaks, we just buy them a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need opportunities to problem solve and be creative and learn to work together.
Yeah.
And that's the one piece that we're missing. So giving them opportunities to, instead of buying everybody a toy, buy 1 toy. Let's figure out how we can make it work.
Yeah.
Or buy 1 toy, buy 4 toys and 1 set of batteries. How do you make that work? It's called share.
Exactly. I love it. Problem solving skills, reading, writing. Let's hope that all parents,
Field trips.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for your time today. We appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. I'll have you back anytime.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.